Hello and welcome back to round 3 of the NRG trial here in Indianapolis, Indiana. Playing some Pioneer today. I'm Wyatt Darby here with Joe Lissette.
Are you sure about that?
Oh, well, I had that backwards.
We'll get the name straightened out. But yeah, we are here for round 3 of Pioneer, and we're going to watch a player who was on my testing group for the last Players Tour, playing Mono White Devotion, which is a deck that I feel like has gotten some support. There's some players that have been talking about this, trying this out, but certainly not a significant share of the metagame.
Yeah, definitely caused a lot of talk when the Heliod Ballista combo was first spoiled,
right.
but relatively kind of underperformed at the last set of Pro Tours. So
Yeah.
Interested to see how that goes. I think the players might be pretty close to being ready, so we'll see if we can swing over the table. And, I think Mono White, it's kind of actually has a lot of ways to build it, considering the single color. I've seen versions with lots of copies of Master the Unseen. I've seen versions that are kind of more aggressive, leaning into Ajani's Pridemate. So interested to see Chris's list here, so we can kind of take a deep dive into that.
And against Nick Roller playing Bant Spirits, so we're gonna have probably Chris is not gonna be doing any blocking this match, but he does have enough life gain to maybe win races, even if his combo doesn't come online. I'm interested how this plays out. This is not a matchup I've seen played.
Yeah, one that's, I actually had some friends who kind of tested this matchup pretty heavily and kind of said that Mono White Devotion was actually in a pretty good spot. It's a deck that's very good at gaining large quantities of life. It has a fair amount of removal to break up the spirit synergies. And here we see Chris leading off with one of his actually more powerful 2-drops, Daxos, but Nick countering back with a Lord and a Lord curve and actually putting a fair amount of unblockable pressure.
Definitely put some damage through. Another advantage for Chris here is that his removal is not going to be stopped by Selfless Spirit, like would be some of the red and black decks, for example, because we're looking at probably Stasis Snares and Ballistas, which could just shoot extra times if it needed to.
Yeah, and Heliod coming down on turn 3 for Chris, and actually in conjunction with Daxos, this is super threatening, actually representing a Walking Ballista combo kill next turn.
And this is something where Nick will have Spellcaller could break that up, but probably nothing else in his deck.
Yeah, and here we see a Mausoleum Wanderer coming down for Nick, definitely understanding the risk that he's under and making sure to represent the Spell Queller. Actually, in this case, because he has it. But, choosing to play Wanderer over, say, having the option for the Collected Company also in his hand. Actually, just a fantastic top 10 cards here for Nick this game.
So for anyone that's unsure exactly what Wyatt was talking about with enabling the combo in turn 4, it's because normally the Ballista would need to be cast for 2 and then with the ability of lifelink. But in this case, because the Daxos will gain a life and you can effectively cast a Ballista for 2 with X only 1. So you basically save 2 mana from the Daxos plus Heliod being in play already. So that's how that would work, although we're not going to see it here. I take it back. We are going to see it here.
Yeah, Chris deciding it was worth the risk, running the Walking Ballista into Spellqueller, which is actually pretty incredible from Nick's side. Stopping, if that Spellqueller dies, the Ballista would come into play and die immediately.
Yeah, that's very, very nice interaction for the Spirit side.
And Anafenza coming down, doing a couple things, both giving Heliod requisite devotion to start attacking, and triggering Heliod, gaining Chris a life off of Daxos, kind of letting the Daxos get a little bit bigger, and start to kind of threaten the board. Right now, Chris isn't representing too much that Nick cares about, but that can change pretty quickly as all of these creatures start to get lifelink and continue to grow.
Yeah, and with Bolster also enabled, this is going to be, any additional creatures are going to be great, although I think Chris is sitting on 2 lands and maybe a Stasis Snare. So Nick is clear to attack in the air, probably not, maybe he wants to save something back to chump block the Heliod itself, but I guess Mausoleum Wanderer's ability is really worth effectively 0 in this matchup.
Yeah, it's interesting. Nick sitting on Collected Company in his hand, how much thought would you give to firing off a main phase Collected Company to grow the Wanderer and maybe hit some Lords?
Hitting Lords seems very valuable, and instead we're adding Selfless Spirit, and okay, well, if we just had the straight kill lined up, then obviously we're going to do that. But yeah, if it wasn't like exact damage, I would have said whatever we're hitting on Collected Company is probably better than Selfless Spirit.
Yeah, and that was a really quick game. Nick just having an entirely unblockable Air Force, and that's one of the advantages of Spirits kind of across formats. We saw that in Modern a bit, Spirits beating humans in the head-to-head because of flying and kind of coming true against, Chris and his, reasonable three ground creatures. So going into sideboards, we can start with Nick here. His Barrett Spirits list has a few one-ofs: Archangel Avacyn, Deputy Detention, Disdainful Stroke, to go along with 2 Dovin's Veto, 2 Rest in Peace, 2 Shadow Spear, Settle the Wreckage, and 4 copies of Mystical Dispute. What would you say stands out most here for you?
Well, Settle the Wreckage is interesting because since Chris can win outside of combat, but still, it seems like it might come in anyway. This is Deputy Detention is a card that can take down everything, including Heliod, so that's nice. I'm not like if I was drawing up a sideboard for this matchup, I did a bad job. That's obviously not what it's intending on beating. As we were saying, Mono White Devotion is not a deck with a target on its head. So we've got a little bit to do here. Deputy, I think, is good. Maybe we bring in Avacyn just to have another big creature. I don't know about Shadow Spear.
Yeah, it seems like if the game devolves into a race, it could carry some weight.
Yeah.
But, that's just kind of where the combo angle of Chris is kind of threatening. And also just the ability to, if Chris can turn into a grindy control deck, all of a sudden 8 extra points of life can actually mean very little, all things considered.
Yeah, this is not it depends really on how many cards Nick has to take out, because nothing here is super exciting to bring in.
Yeah, and we'll see if Chris has anything a little bit more appealing. From the White Devotion side, kind of a really flexible sideboard here. 1 copy of Deafening Silence, 2 Damping Sphere, Rest in Peace, and Glare of Heresy, to go along with 1 extra Stasis Snare, Gideon Blackblade, 2 Gideon Ally of Zendikar, kind of Terror of Standards Past, 1 Gideon's Intervention, Lyra Dongbringer, and 2 Elspeth Conqueror's Death. So I see a few different things here that jump out. Glare of Heresy, reasonable, although kind of sorcery speed removal has some problems against spirits.
It's not ideal, but it's cheap. We're going to be spending even or fewer mana than the thing we're killing, which is ideal. I think we'll definitely see those. I think Lyra Dawnbringer is going to come in. That'll be a huge nuisance. I mean, it's not going to be easy to get on the board, but it will take over probably when it hits. Elspeth Conqueror's Death kills everything important, but also gets messed up just by rattle chains. So I don't know how exciting that is. I think maybe we're just maxing out on our available removal and probably just stopping there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Elspeth Conqueror's Death has an interesting dynamic. Being able to dodge Spell Queller is great, but kind of, again, walking into the rattle chains that I suspect Nick is going to have a lot of copies of, hanging around his deck still, just because the flexibility for the flash is really valuable. And it looks like the players are drawn up to 7, so why don't we go down to the table and take a look, see if we have some keeps here.
This is a scenario where probably 2 weeks ago, Mono White Devotion had a better sideboard against spirits, but now we see a lot of cards that are targeted towards the top of the metagame. So, like the 1 white enchantment where you can only Deafening Silence. That's probably not a card that was there a few weeks ago. It was probably just Damping Spheres and we'll call it good. And now we see more things. The Gideon's Intervention, another card that's replaced something else to deal with the combo decks. So we're seeing not maybe as many tools as we would like on either side.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. What do you think about the white decks kind of almost slowly morphing away from an aggro deck, almost to a prison strategy with the sideboard package?
I like it. I like the aspects where you have where your combo might be too slow against the aggro decks. You just have overwhelming life gain to try and combat that. So yeah, the prison-ish aspect, I guess, where you can just lock down. I watched him play last round against Lotus Breach. And both sideboard games kind of went the same way. It was the player established Lotus Field, sacrificing other lands. Damping Sphere came down. Now you have 1 mana, and it's just a super beating. And he was able to ride that to victory in both Game 2 and Game 3 after getting squashed in the first.
And here we see a pair of 1-drops for both players. Chris with Thraben Inspector against a Shadow Spear, but Nick kind of gambling a bit, keeping a 1-lander and actually bricking, looks like just once. Just once.
Yeah, so that gives you... I mean, if you miss it twice here, probably no matter what Chris does, you're probably just too far behind to catch up. But from here, with a blocker on the board that actually probably holds off the whole board this turn, and then with the equip, Nick might be able to stabilize, although I take it back as Heliod is going to activate.
Yeah, Arcanist coming down, finding another copy of itself, kind of keeping that nice value train rolling, and doing all the heavy lifting to enable Heliod to come in. So, yeah, now Nick's under the gun, facing down the potential for a combo, and also just the potential for kind of overwhelming beatdown, too.
Yeah, this damage is going to pile up fast, and we have actual I misspoke earlier when I said that Chris wouldn't be doing much blocking. We do have flyers in his deck. We've drawn one that drew another one this game, so that's going to really – the Shadow Spear is not going to do as much because it's not going to be unimpeded attackers this game.
Yeah, definitely the Shadow Spear kind of looking kind of like a mulligan at this point. Part of that is, Nick's mana is just so tied up that it's kind of hard to deploy. And this is actually pretty powerful. Nykthos letting Chris make 7 mana this turn. Definitely one of the best decks to abuse it is this white deck. And Stasis Snare is going to unlock Heliod and play the Owl.
Yeah, this is a whole lot of action. And we're going to see, let's see, the Owl gets enchantments or artifacts. And we find, I believe that's Baffling End. Is that
Yeah, Baffling End, which
Baffling
can
End, yeah.
exile basically Nick's deck, creatures that cost 3 or less. And the attacks are coming in. Nick's actually already looks like down to below 10. And this is kind of one of the downsides of being Bant with your Spirits deck. Nick's drawn 3 Shocklands now with Temple Garden off the top, and all of them have had to come into play on tap. So he was under the gun already, but his own mana bases might have accelerated the pace by a turn or two here.
Yeah, and also when you're playing a deck that's based on creature synergies, when the creatures are having to chump block, that leaves you in a very unlikely position to be able to actually catch up when you fall behind, which is certainly the state Nick finds him in right now.
Yeah, and again, Chris doing exactly what makes me want to play this White Devotion deck, tapping Nykthos now for over 10 mana. So even though there's a risk of a Spell Queller, almost doesn't even matter here. He just has gas because Arcanist Owls have been feeding him spells, and I think he can just kind of brute force the light interaction that Nick can present.
Yeah, and then with, any excess mana can just get pumped through Heliod to lifelink anything, and Chris's creatures will grow, and Nick will just find himself in a hole, even if he survives the turn, which he's not going to, in a place where there's just no way he can catch up.
Yeah, 2 pretty quick and dominant games.
Yes.
I think it's tough because the game that Nick won, game 1, was actually a lot more of both players kind of operating at kind of regular capacities. But we actually didn't even really see too much in the way of sideboard cards from Chris that game. That was kind of just the main deck coming out to play, and Nykthos going kind of unimpeded against the Spirits deck that actually does not have very much hard removal. I think that card might be
That's
the best
true.
here.
Yeah, Nykthos is going to be basically the devotion is going to be whatever Chris draws because Nick's not going to kill anything. And in this case, when you can tap a couple lands, lifelink everything, and grow everything, if with Heliod and Nykthos in combination, Nick's going to have a hard time fighting through that. I'm not even sure what he's really capable of doing to break through that. We don't have Declaration in Stone or something that we can actually just exile cards. We have Deputy. I think we had 1, and that's not going to cut it.
Yeah, it's kind of seems like Nick is almost forced into just being the aggressor, right? Being the beatdown and hoping the evasion carries him.
Now, in the scenario that we saw last game, if he did board in the Settle the Record and draw it, it would have done a lot of work. Now, does that get him in a position to be able to win the game? I don't know, but that is I was saying how he can have a hard time catching up. Settle the Record can do that. Not so much a card advantage, but it catch you up on the board and give you some time to breathe and maybe get Shadow Spear going on one of your creatures or get something positive working in your favor.
Yeah, it's a card that you can mask. Collected Company kind of hides your intentions, and, there's just enough Flash Spirits that I think Chris might not always sniff that one out and appropriately play around it. No,
I agree. There's definitely a card that could catch you, and you wouldn't necessarily hold back, especially with lifelink. You're benefiting from sending in everything, and so that may be what happens.
And it's like we're back down here for Game 3. Chris is on the draw this game, and both players taking a pretty quick mulligan. Nick's hand seemed to be kind of overloaded with some of the more expensive cards, and Spirits is a deck that kind of needs its first 3 lands to have any reasonable chance here.
Yeah, I think I saw 2 companies in there, and that's already a lot of the top end. And we need to develop out so that, because Chris's deck, even though we have last game we were tapping for 10 mana and doing lots of things, there are a lot of reasonably strong 2-drops in the deck.
And if you could kind of sculpt a perfect hand for Nick on the play with 6 cards, what do you think he's looking for kind of most here?
Well, I think I was going to say we're going to try and not draw a 1-drop because I just don't think they're good in the matchup. And he did pull up a Mausoleum Wanderer there. I mean, we can do some damage, but in the long term, if a game lasts a while, the Smithsonian Wanderer not being able to actually activate on anything does seem like it's kind of a liability as it's the smallest creature in his deck. I think we'd like to see Rattle Chains on 2, and then a Spell Queller, maybe a Spell Queller and a Lord to give us an option on 3, and then the other one of those in a Collected Company on 4. That would be ideal, I would think.
And here we see Wanderer coming down the first turn. Nick currently not showing any white mana, but still reasonable beatdown, deciding the flexibility of a defensive Rattle Chains, not worth it. I want to get an extra point of damage in. And Chris not able to punish with a removal spell, instead opting for his own curve and defense on turn 2.
Right, and that I think what removal spells will be available to Chris there, probably just Ballista on 1. And that may not be something he wants to run out anyway.
Yeah, and Baffling End is a card that he does play a few copies of, and that's one that in particular against Rattle Chains is kind of weak. So kind of interesting choice there by Nick. Not having a third land or third color, a little bit awkward, but I believe there's a second Rattle Chains hiding in the wing, so Nick does still have some options for this turn.
Yeah, so Chris would be best served by doing anything other than trying to kill a creature here, which that may be something he's able to realize, since that's one of the few cards that Nick has that actually are turned on right now and able to be cast.
Yeah, and Chris kind of mulling some options. I think of cards in hand. I see multiple copies of Heliod, as well as some white 2-drops that he can play. So, Heliod doesn't do a ton on the table. And here I actually see kind of an ambush Rattle Chains. What do you think about Nick trying to set up a potential block and trade here?
Well, it depends. Boy, I'm not sure. Without knowing the exact contents of his hand, I think taking Devotion off the table against a Heliod deck is pretty valuable. So just based on that alone, that might have made it worthwhile.
Yeah, it's tough, though, because on the board as it is, Nick is kind of leveraging beatdown, so giving up an extra 2 power is pretty real. But, it's tough. This white deck can gain life back in pretty large chunks very quickly. And, it's actually, this might be working out for Nick, though. This Heliod might be stranded. I don't think Chris can add more than 2 Devotion this turn.
Yeah, trading 2 for 2 each way is probably in Nick's favor, but without the trade, the Heliod would be coming in this turn, and that would be unpleasant.
Yeah, and here we see some kind of tactical missed land drops by Nick. Knight of the White Ochre coming down from Chris, not getting a land, just being a Grizzly Bear with not particularly relevant first strike. And the third land, also a white source for Nick, so we'll see what the play is. I think there's some flexibility between... Yeah, it looks like Deputy over a Spirit, kind of removing Heliod, removing the threat of beatdown, and Chris's kind of looming life gain.
Yeah, I mean, removing the threat. Chris, it's 7. I mean, he draws the 4th land here, which is very big. Now he can deploy a flyer, which is going to help him stabilize, probably. Looked like some lands and a Baffling End there, and some other card they're going to go to the bottom of the deck. It's kind of odd, I feel now, where we are in Pioneer, where some of the cards send other cards to the bottom, will allow you to order them how you like, and some force them to be randomized. It seems like it would be easier on the players if they just all function the same way, since the difference is really negligible as far as impact on the game.
Yeah, the amount of time I could save with, instead of offering the random 2-card kind.
Yeah.
But here we see Empyrean Eagle coming down, making 3 power flying attackers. Chris is forced to take kind of a medium trade and drop all the way down to 1. So this is kind of disaster for Chris. I don't know if there's a single card that can pull him back, although Glare of Heresy plus the Baffling End, still not enough. There's 3 lethal attackers in the air.
Yeah, that might be it. This might be over.
Yeah, this white deck is one that plays the control role, but its reliance on its own board kind of stops it from being a deck that could play sweepers reasonably. And in this situation, I think that's kind of one of the few effects that could facilitate a comeback.
Yeah.
And here we see it. Yeah, Chris extends the hand, unable to find any way. And Nick shows the Collected Company that he saw it in the tank in case things got close. So, yeah, Nick taking a 3-game match where, both players had some stumbles, but the games that Nick won, was kind of on relatively even keel.
All 3 games over very quickly. That was not the most competitive games, really. Yeah, you're like someone just got ran over all 3 times, but that should give us plenty of time for a backup match. Hopefully, we'll get word on in a moment.
Yeah, we'll swing it down. Looks like our backup match is about to start game 2, so we can hop in and join them without missing really much at all of the action here. So we'll see. We'll be ready when they are. And yeah, I think that game was kind of harkened almost back to Pioneer pre-Theros, where the format was a lot more about kind of creature-based decks racing. And although the White Devotion deck is new, it's still kind of, we saw combat mattered a lot there.
Right, it did, and we saw, board presence mattered. Like Spirit, we have Devotion versus Spirits is not, a Devotion deck, but still it's a tribal deck, and the creature synergies build up, and even the more mana symbols on the board, the better for you, even though it's not technically Devotion.
And in our backup match here, we do have Jacob Dyer on mono green ramp. Not a super popular deck recently. And Chad Harney, his opponent, playing Sultai Delirium. So it looks like Jacob won the first game. Not necessarily a huge surprise. Ramp has kind of always feasted on mid-range since really the dawn of the archetypes. And we'll just got the list here so we can kind of dig in. Anything out of the ordinary for Jacob's ramp list?
I'm not sure exactly what the ordinary would be in this case, so it's not quite mono green there. We do have Uro, but there are kind of expected. There's mana ramp creatures, a Boreal Grazer. We do. Let me see. Do we have the top end of the curve? There's an Ulamog. There are Ugins. Trying to look for if we have a. No, we do not. So we do have a Ballista as a tutor target for. No, I take that back. We do not have Sanctum of Ugin either. So yeah, we're just ramping up straight into big Eldrazi-ish cards.
Yeah, and as this game, we've only seen one turn so far, but Thoughtseize is actually taking a pretty critical Nissus Pilgrimage. Jacob kept the hand that's relatively light mana-wise, so we'll see exactly how devastating that is. Llanowar Elf does still threaten some real acceleration, but, with cards that cost 8, you really do, you can't really afford to miss any land drops. And here we actually see a Thoughtseize bug happening, a second copy of Pilgrimage, really undoing, I think, the cleanest path to victory that Chad had so far.
Sure, and this is going to be, once we get towards 5 mana when Cavaliers start coming down, then things can rapidly get out of control for Jacob. Chad is playing, are we on one Emrakul and kind of traverse targets here? Is that basically what we're looking at?
Yeah, pretty regular kind of Sultai Delirium. I think the biggest thing in the main deck at least is 3 copies of Tireless Tracker is a lot heavier on that effect than we've seen. But, again, kind of talks to how combo has been a big part of the format. I feel like this deck tends to lean on Tracker and Disruption in a lot of those matchups. So definitely not ideal against ramp, but I think for Chad, it's interesting. Both decks are leaning pretty heavily into Uro, and I think Chad is going to be the better player at kind of leveraging that card early. And I'm not sure beyond just that large body, Chad has a convenient way to close the game fast enough here.
Sure. I think there are 2 copies of Ugin, and that's going to come down very strong for Jacob if we get that far into the game. I mean, there are probably some ways to Murderous Riders to kill it, but even so, it's going to take the whole board with it every single time.
And you mentioned the importance of Cavalier. Here we actually see it on turn 3 from Jacob, so we'll see if there can be any graveyard value picked up. And yeah, just some very threatening cards. Another Cavalier getting dumped punishes Chad pretty heavily for actually killing the first Cavalier, and that's brutal because the 5/6 is kind of stonewalling his Tireless Tracker.
Cavalier of Thorns is a very mean card. It's not fun to kill, and it's not fun to have up against you. It always generates it. Well, not always. It barely generates. I believe the 5th card was the only land there, but that's still good enough. And also, it enables Uro. I was looking at so we have 2 cards. We have the Cavalier, and we have Satyr Wayfinder that dumps cards into the graveyard to power up Uro's Escape Clause. It's probably even with Chad's deck, we're going to have Wayfinder, and then we have how many Grizzly Salvages to basically play the same role, I think.
Yeah, it looks like Chad has 6 cards with 2 Grizzly Salvages as well.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I guess, when you're looking at Uro, it seems like the ramp deck is going to be a little bit better at kind of shrugging off the impact of the card. But if Chad's getting attacked by an Uro, his deck doesn't necessarily have the kind of big top end that can really overcome that.
Yeah, and Jacob's drawing to, late game just drawing cards. Jacob's drawing to turbo bombs, and Chad's drawing to nice interactions.
Yeah, and speaking of a bomb, we see this is turn 4 Ugin. shooting down, well, actually cleaning up all the small stuff on the board, Tireless Track and Arboreal Grazer included. And yeah, just has kind of been a clinic from Jacob, just kind of, I think, crushing the matchup that he probably set out to beat.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, Chad here, I mean, even if we have the right mana and have Murder Strider to remove this Ugin, we're still getting just beat up by the Cavalier. And Jacob has some cards left in hand. I don't think too many. And we do have double blue to enable Uro if there is one in the graveyard.
And, you know, from Chad's side, being down a game, it's kind of tough. You know, you do lean on your sideboard to kind of fix some of your troublesome mid-range matchups, but, you know, with Ramp being a deck that kind of struggles against the combo decks of the, we don't really actually see much respect from Chad. You know, cards like Disdainful Stroke being the most powerful thing, Noxious Grasp being reasonable as well, but yeah, we've kind of seen a lot of the less powerful main deck stuff, and here we do see the Murderous Rider, so that's going to provide some interaction on Ugin, but while doing so kind of speeds up the clock in which Cavalier is going to end the game.
Mm-hmm. It does show kind of the versatility of Traverse, as we're basically these adventure creatures allow Traverse to search for spells, which is fantastic in a long game where you're able to develop, and not so much a game where you're getting beat for 5 a turn by a Cavalier that you really don't want to kill.
Yeah, and here we do see Murderous Rider. For 1 and 2 black, you can get either a 2/3 lifelinker that puts itself on the bottom when it dies, or more commonly, Swift End, which can kill any creature or planeswalker. Does a pretty good hero's downfall impression, but at the cost of 2 life. And the threats keep coming for Jacob. Another Cavalier of Thorns gives him another lethal attacker on the next turn, and another way to dig for Uro. Looks like a bit of a miss there, but, you know, 4 lanes he doesn't have to draw, and really just the body, I think, is all Jacob really needs here.
Yeah, again, and we already mentioned it twice, but a body that you can't kill effectively, as it just is going to bring back something else.
It's almost giving me kind of like shades of Jund versus Tron in Modern from years past by how these games have been playing so far. And
I wouldn't know much about that. As being on the Tron side, you don't really think about Jund. You just squash it and move on. But yeah, no, I see what you're saying. There's big creatures that you can sort of deal with, but not effectively, and there's just too many of them. Once the mana is established, once things get rolling, Jacob is just going to continue to add huge cards to the board every turn.
Yeah, and, you know, I think the big inflection point this game was actually just on turn 2. You know, we saw that Thoughtseize take a copy of Nissa's Pilgrimage, but the second, you know, kind of facilitated Jacob's mana, and since then there really has not been a single hitch in the plan. So that's kind of can show how easy it is for the House of Cards to crumble for Sultai. And now Chad, I think, might be playing a bit of a, well, not a Desperation Uro. Looks like Tireless Tracker just trying to do anything to get a little bit more battlefield presence.
And it looks like that's a breeding pool, isn't it? So we shocked in there?
Yep.
So that's going to tell. Well, we need to have something, obviously. And whatever removal spell we have is just, okay. Sultai Charm to destroy the Cavalier, but this is just going to buy Chad a draw step, really.
Yeah, the punishment for killing the Cavalier is a much more powerful card being put on top, and the shock actually meant that Chad is dead to a single lightning bolt from Ugin. So I think that's even an Uro in hand for Jacob, so kind of choose your own adventure. I think most plays are going to lead to lethal here, and more than enough blue to play both sides of Uro in the same turn, so looks like might be holding on to it.
If that's, well, okay, possibly. Because if he does escape the Uro, he would draw the Ugin. Maybe he wants to protect it from a Thoughtseize. That's an idea.
Yeah, it's true. Jacob is in a position where
he can do really whatever he wants. Okay, he's going to get milled here. So the Ipnu Rivulet is going to take down. Not only does it take down, wow, I believe it took down 2 Ugins and a Ballista. So the 3 cards in the deck that can directly kill him outside of combat.
Yeah, and beyond that, Chad was able to find himself another way to extend the game. Tireless Tracker making a clue before it dies, but mostly just serving as anything to get in front of Cavalier. So, you know, Jacob might have played a little bit on the conservative side and, you know, not hugely punished, but this game is actually extending a little bit longer than it may have otherwise.
Mm-hmm. So now we're lining up the Uro, it looks like. Yep, there it is. And this is going to, I mean, I don't know if Chad really had, at this point, would have had much confidence, but now it's just going to be evaporating completely. This is just another large body, free cards for Jacob, free life that he doesn't even need. And what is Chad drawing to here? I mean, we have to be able to kill multiple 6 toughness creatures.
Yeah, I think from Chad's side, if he plays both parts of an Uro next turn, he could have the ability to block a Cavalier and not be dead to the opposing Uro hitting him.
Right.
But there is an Uro in hand, so he could, continue to drag the game out, but that puts him up to 8 life, and still, margins are really small, but I actually don't think it's 0% for Chad here.
Right.
That being said, asking your opponent to miss when Uro is presenting them 2 cards a turn, and there's so many Haymakers still left in Jacob's deck, I think this would be kind of almost, I hate to say it, but kind of a historic comeback if he was able to put this together.
This is going to be very, and we can't kill the Cavalier ever because of the Ugins in the graveyard. But it does look like Chad will survive another turn. And then if both players just regurgitate their Uro back onto the board, Chad would actually survive again.
Yeah, and the beauty is his Uro is actually giving him all the mana he needs to filter through these clues. And, the Sultai Delirium deck, not the most lean strategy in Pioneer, but actually does have a solid amount of cheaper interaction. So a card like if he does still have like a Scavenging Ooze in his deck, that could actually kind of break the Uro parity and gain him some life back, and that actually might be pretty critical.
Either player hitting that would be significant. And Jacob, a Scavenging Ooze on Chad's side would cause quite a bit of difficulty, and it would remove the problem for the Cavalier. However, I think Jacob, he might have drawn a Grafdigger's Cage, which would allow him to bring back his Uro and then prevent Chad's from coming back, I believe. That would be quite good.
Wow, yeah, that's just, normally it's a card that doesn't really, it's a symmetrical effect, but being able to, get everything you need out of your graveyard and then shut off Chad's is pretty critical. And honestly, Jacob, the Cavalier doesn't get stopped by Grafdigger's Cage. So at that point, just kind of almost like a surgical extraction.
I actually second-guessed myself a little bit as whether that's what actually it was, because it doesn't seem like a card it's not obviously going to be great all the time. Sometimes it's going to maybe mess with your abilities, and yet we have a lot going on here. Okay, so no. So either I misread it or else he chose not to play it. But deploying a Squadron of Elves may get the job done anyway.
Yeah, with Chad all the way down to 2, even kind of mediocre-looking attackers can carry a lot of value here. And, the Uro being brought back brings Chad up to 5, so...
Yeah,
if he finds a way to kill or bounce something off the Cavalier, that's kind of all he needs to continue to extend the game. Yeah, and actually, Fatal Push is going to pair with the clue being cracked to take down the opposing Uro. And, yet again, Chad's just doing enough to hang in there.
Yeah, but... Well, I guess if one of the players runs out of graveyard, then that could... play an impact if Jacob can't bring the Uro back again. It looks like he might be able to, though.
Yeah, I think with 2 Cavaliers and 2 Wayfinders, he probably has at least 1 Uro in the tank. Oh, an Emrakul.
Okay.
So that could be a card that could make that could kind of do something for Chad. I mean, if the Cavalier dies and Jacob puts an impactful card on top, I'm sure Chad could find some way to kind of minimize the impact of that. Downside, of course, is that these Uros coming back turn after turn has whittled away a lot of Chad's graveyard. I suspect Emrakul is probably still castable, but quite close to full 13 mana.
All right, so here we have the block, and we are going to bring back Ugin. Okay. Chad at 2. So the Uro didn't come back for Jacob's side last turn. So I wonder if his graveyard's actually smaller than... No, it is. No, so he could have. He just chose not to? Is that what happened? Oh, 3, 4... Oh, this might just be over right now.
Yeah, enough mana to escape the Uro, remake the Ugin, and have the lightning bolt that he needs will actually end up taking the match home for Jacob 2-0. Yeah, I think a really valiant attempt by Chad, piecing together, just enough value. And actually, Uro, even in a losing effort, just really demonstrating its power, it kind of single-handedly kept Chad afloat.
Yeah, no, Uro, very strong. Generates a lot of advantage, a lot of life. Basically, Chad needed all aspects of it in order to stay alive there. It's a card that maybe in the future would have a bigger impact on the format than it does now, but the top 2 decks in the format don't care too much about it, but maybe every other deck does dislike playing against it.
Yeah, it certainly seems like the card that kind of single-handedly pulled mid-range back into Pioneer. And, it's kind of interesting just to see the impact of these new sets. Theros, the third best Pioneer card, still creates an archetype. The card can just sort of dominate aggro decks by itself. Control really has to be afraid of it. And, yeah, I think we're gonna see a lot more of it in the near future, especially if Wizards decides to kind of maybe take some shots at the combo cards in the recent ban updates.
I think that would be completely unwarranted. I don't know what you're talking about. The format is fine. They can leave it alone. I want to play some more with Lotus Breach before anything happens. And I'm sure so do all the other people that are already playing it.
Yeah, speaking of, we are going to have a wonderful another NRG weekend coming up in Milwaukee on the 21st and 22nd of March. Saturday, one of my favorite formats is actually Team Constructed, where you can play Pioneer, Modern, and Legacy with 2 of your friends. And on Sunday, we'll be having another 5K trial, this time Pioneer. So I think the format's still in a great spot, even if we do have some decks that people are a little bit, we've heard some discourse about those. And yeah, I think it's fantastic and again, not too far away. So it's going to be one of the last events of Season 1 of the NRG series, so you can make it to that if you want to continue to collect some points. And we also, another way to get some points is we have CTQs. The next one for that is going to be a $1,000 Pioneer tournament in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, hosted by OCM and First Turn Games. Really, First Turn, one of the premier stores in Iowa. I go there a lot. Really fantastic people, great venue. And OCM is another excellent vendor. So recommend going to that if you can. There's also going to be Team Constructed in Des Moines on March 28th. So be sure to check both of those out if you're on the leaderboard hunt or just want to play some Pioneer, Legacy, Modern. Lots of, I think, actually pretty good constructed formats right now. And yeah, looks like that's actually going to bring us to the end of round 3. So we'll be back with round 4 with Joe and Matt in the booth. So looking forward to more Pioneer action, and we'll see everyone in a bit.